Okay, we're now streaming live.
Great, thank you very much. And good afternoon, members and colleagues. So Gemma, do we want to go into the meeting formally? Do you want to take us into the...
Yes, okay. So the first agenda item is apologies for absence. I have received an apology from Councillor Mrs. Hollingsby. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Excellent. Okay, and the minutes of the last meeting held on the 7th of June 24, is everybody happy to agree those?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Super. Okay, so we then move on to outside bodies review, and I'll hand over to Michelle.
Thank you, Gemma. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to attempt to share my screen with you so that we can go through the presentation, but I have a message come up saying host disabled participant screen sharing. So I don't think I can.
Let me just check, Michelle. Apologies. I thought I had made you a code. You should now be able to.
Okay. Yes, I think I can now. So let me just find the presentation. Sorry, it's not. I'm still not able to do it, Gemma. So stop and start again.
No, I'll do it on my screen.
Yeah, sorry, Gemma, it's just not working.
Okay. Bear with me.
Any joy, Gemma?
Yeah, I'm just working on it now.
Okay, all right. Well, just while we're getting that up, members will note from the pack that some of the slides were pre-circulated, so hopefully you've had a chance to absorb those. I've asked Michelle to talk you through this, and I think we'll probably have to come to talk about it again. It depends how far we get today in terms of the steer, but as it's now looking as though it's on the screen, I can seamlessly hand over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. So I think I came to your last meeting. I'm not sure that there has been a meeting in between. I'm sure there hasn't. So I came to the last meeting and we discussed the outline of the review. And if you could just pop onto the next slide, please, Gemma. Sorry, I don't know if I can control it. So just the first slide is just a recap. And as Susan said, hopefully you've had time to have a look through the slides. So we currently, via the leader, appoint to 31 outside bodies. And a formal review hasn't been undertaken for a little while. So it was just a recap of the strategic objectives. So establishing a strategic framework, clarifying the role and status of each, improving the information exchange, and I'll come on to all of these in just a moment with the findings that I've already got, and ensure appropriate support for members who are appointed to outside bodies. As part of the review, we've looked at the appropriateness, and these are things that we would like you to consider, the necessary linkages with the council's existing partnerships policy. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to look, but the council does have a grants and partnerships database and a partnerships policy, and that is, if you've had a chance to have a look at that, it's a much more of a formal recognition of partnerships, how people can start them, what we need to do to be able to join them, and the information that we hold on them, and then that then links into what grants these partnerships have, or how we may fund or not. The difference between the outside bodies and the partnerships policy is that with the outside bodies, members are formally appointed to a body that usually already exists. But the way the partnerships policy and database is managed is very relevant to this piece of work. And we'll have a look at that when we come on to the findings. So we also wanted to ask your thoughts around the arrangements to ensure that information and feedback is passed between the council and the outside body, and just a records management system in the same way that the partnerships policy and database exists. So if we could pop on to the next slide, please, Gemma. So when I spoke to you last time, I was in the middle of the analysis. I was reviewing each of the partnerships I was reviewing the outside bodies and looking at the data on partnerships. And we've also got advisory boards, such as the Joint Transportation Board. We said that we'd group them into themes, which I hope you've seen has been done on the attached document, and find out if the outside bodies are formally constituted and their funding position and outcomes. We still have a few gaps there, but I do know whether they're formally constituted or not. It's really the funding position that some of them may still need a little bit of work on. So this stage, and what I'm hoping to do with you today, is just to present the findings that are coming out of that research piece of work, and ask for your thoughts on the outside bodies, whether the strategic objectives are still right, and consider what links can be made to the new committee system and how the reporting process will work back in. So after we've had all your thoughts and taken all of that into consideration, then I'll be able to provide a formal final report that captures all of your feedback, all of the research that's been done, and looks at whether we want to streamline the number of outside bodies, how you might want them to link to the committees, if and how, information that we want to hold, the feedback loop, and how decisions are made as to appointing to outside bodies. So if I could flip on to the next slide, please. So from the research that I've already done, I've looked at each of them, and you'll have seen that in the table accompanying. And I think the biggest thing that comes across is that we don't currently hold a lot of information about outside bodies. We have a list on the internet, on the website, that kind of gives a very sort of short glimpse of what the outside body is about, but we don't hold any other information around that. Members can be represented in different capacities. That's not always clear. It could be as a voting member or a trustee. We don't hold information on that, and we really don't give advice to members who are appointed as to what that role entails and things that they may need to consider. In line with that, with some of the roles, the council may need to be providing insurance or indemnity to the member appointed to the outside body, and we currently have no indication of what the roles are and whether that's required, and it may be, but only in some smaller circumstances. From having spoken to some members, and thank you to anyone on the call today who's helped me with information, because that's been fantastic and everyone's responded very quickly. We don't seem to have any protocols around what's expected of members, whether there's any training requirements. We don't hold a lot of information on outside bodies. There's no feedback loop currently, although some do rate. There is no standard or feedback template that members can easily use. And we don't particularly link very well with the grants and partnerships database or the council's partnership policy. So all of these things have come through in the research. And if I could move to the next slide, please. So the recommendations that I've put together, having done the initial stage of research, is we need to give further consideration as to what decision-making framework is used. I have suggested, and it's my emerging thoughts, having done the research piece of work, whether the outside bodies should be retained as an outside body, whether they should be held purely on the partnerships database, or whether we could actually look to remove some. I think in the work that I've done, it's become quite clear that being an outside body and on the council's outside bodies list is quite a privilege, might not be the right word, but it's a good position. And so actually having a smaller number shows how relevant it is to the council that these are the list of outside bodies, and that some of these are partnerships and they can be treated as partnerships in their own right. So I've recommended those, but that is just my recommendations from that work. Again, we need to have a think about how often and what kind of feedback you would like and to who. you will see that a lot of the partnerships tend to fall, in my opinion, under the Communities and Environment Committee. So if that were the case, how often and how big a report would we kind of want, or would it go back to council? We need to have a think about how the arrangements are made, the duration of the appointment, the support insurance, bless you, can't see who that was, but bless you, the support insurance and training needs associated with the appointments, and the grants database needs to click into that. And obviously with some of the members who are appointed, there are officer support, and it's how we look at that and make sure that's realistic and appropriate. So could I have the next slide, please? So that's kind of the feedback. And then I think the next document is the longer list of the partnerships and how I've potentially grouped them, having done the initial research. And I don't know if you want to go through them line by line, or if you've had a chance to look at them. I'm not sure how you want to take this part forward, whether you want me to go through them, or whether you just want to pause here and have a think about the strategic objectives and your thoughts on the piece of work so far.
Thank you, Michelle. Can I suggest that we start just by making sure that we are on firm ground with the strategic objectives? There hasn't been any concern about those raised in the past when we have flagged this piece of work to you, but I just would like to make sure before we spend more time and effort that if you want any tweaks to it, we've had a chance to discuss that. And then we can go into any points of detail, absolutely, Michelle, as you quite rightly say. So on those strategic objectives, Michelle, I think it was your first slide. Sorry, Gemma, I'm just flicking back in the pack. They are identified as, let me have a look, sorry, to establish the strategic framework, to clarify the status, role and value, to look about how we improve information exchange, and then also about appropriate support for participants. Is there anything that members suggest is missing, or a variation or nuance on what we've captured? No? Okay. Then can I ask the next question then, which is, again, just to make sure we're on the right track, the differentiation that we're seeking to make between outside body and the status of an outside body, and the support that's wrapped around members that are invited to be on those, versus a partnership policy, which is more of a more flexible, looser, less, so terrible language, isn't it? But a different status. Is everyone broadly comfortable with that? Great, thank you very much. Just for those of you that haven't got that weren't with us over the many years, the actual partnership policy was first created as a result of an audit recommendation, because there were a number of partnerships. Now I'm going back probably more than 15 years ago. There were a number of partnerships that were very loose, and so the recommendation was to put around a policy. So that is why the council has a partnerships policy. Albeit it's not referred to very often, and I think this piece of work has been helpful in pulling them together. So thank you very much for your support for that. So those are the two bigger bits of strategy that we're on firmer ground. Do we want to now go into the proposals that we've got that are emerging, or any questions about how some of them might map across, or which are the ones that we're thinking of perhaps removing? Any members want to comment on that? Just happy with the work. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Michelle, take it when you get it.
All right.
His hand up there.
Okay. Can I ask?
I think Paul had his hand up.
Someone has a hand
Paul,
up.
Yeah.
Paul. Sorry, I missed you, Paul. Sorry about that. Come on in.
No, I was just going to say the way that we've set it up, or the way Michelle's suggested to is very rational in terms of how that's laid out. So I'm just saying that how whatever decisions we make, I think the way that there isn't a fourth option is my view of the world. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, great. I was just going to, at this stage, ask some of our advisors, David and Kirsty, if there are any other, before we go into the detail, are there any other reflections that you would advise us to consider as we move forward in terms of that bigger strategic picture, again, from your experience of working elsewhere, before we get into the more granular level of discussions? Kirsty, do you want to come in?
I was just going to say, when we designed our committee system, because we went at Newark and Sherwood, which was my substantive role before I started doing consultancy. We moved from a cabinet to a committee system and spent a lot of time in the planning of it. And one of the things we looked at was outside bodies. And in the review, I think the one thing you haven't touched on is we found that actually some were moribund. So we looked at the frequency of meetings too. The other key thing we looked at was links to corporate and strategic objectives. So if there wasn't, if they're a bit peripheral to, so the council might have had an objective, say, of enhancing health and well-being. So if it was an outside body that contributed to that, we'd star it as being more important, if you like. And then, so those that were kind of peripheral, really peripheral to the council, we said, well, okay, members can still sit on those bodies if they want to, but that's a matter of their choice rather than being almost supported by the council, if you like. So that's one thing. Then within the design of the committee system, because like you, we didn't, the members didn't want dedicated overview scrutiny, you have to look at how you're going to deliver your function. And one aspect of that is not just internal focus on policy development and review, but it's looking at relationships with external bodies and how they can work better. So we aligned committee remits with the external agenda as well. So we looked at important external partnerships and said, and we actually had 3 committees, so you've got 2, but we looked at what does the remit of this align with? So it's responsible for relationships with, I don't know, say we always had a problem with East Midlands Ambulance Service and targets and timescales, or this one aligns to the relationships with the police and so on. And we put external outside bodies within those. And then we developed a protocol on how we did appointments to those outside bodies. So some of them are very community focused. We had a lot of local community centres and things that appointed council representatives. So we said there'll be a presumption there that it'll be the local ward member. On others, we said because it links to this committee, the representative should sit on that committee, and there should be a requirement to report back to the committee if anything of importance happens within that outside body. I mean, that's all very aspirational. I can't say that it actually worked very well in practice, but the framework was there. So that's just an idea of how we did it.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I think we had discussed about the linkage with the new emerging corporate plan. I think that's really helpful to make sure we've got those hooks, as you say, really clearly understood. Thank you, Kirsty. David, anything from you?
No, nothing from me. I can't beat what Kirsty's said there.
Okay, all right.
I've actually been there, done it.
Quite. So if we're happy with the sort of broader strategic framework, the direction of travel, of course, it's going to come back to you at the next meeting. But are there any sort of reflections or any observations on the table that you want us to look at or think about in a little bit more detail?
Connor's got his hand up, Susan.
Sorry, Connor. Trying to find my
Cheers. Yeah, I mean, broadly, sort of it looks like it sort of fits the system that's we're looking to implement. Largely in agreement with the the ones that could be stopped. Although if they are sort of meeting in some way, then perhaps they sort of still exist in some form. The KCC things. If there's still representation there, but maybe just, as you say, in a different format rather than a formal outside body. I don't know. So, but if they're not really sort of part of what we're doing as a council, and the other one I looked at, which potentially report into either committee, I guess, but it was the business advisory board. I think, whereas that's at the minute under like the communities environment, possibly more linked to sort of strategy and resources, especially, the council decides to do something similar to like a new high streets fund or the green business initiatives that we're doing, those conversations probably would link into more the strategy and resources committee, in terms of, releasing funding or getting access to funds for local businesses. I think that'd be more akin to that committee rather than the one it's currently linked under.
Thank you, Connor. Any broad agreement to that? I mean, I think some of them I might have put a couple of question mark around them, but I could argue them either way. So, but that absolutely is a point well made.
I'm just going to add one more thing, and that's on grants. And again, a piece of work we did is the important thing on grants is because you're thinking about the council's priorities and objectives. You award the grant, but it's subject to the delivery of outcomes that also meet outcomes that the council wants to see. So that's just another suggestion.
Always. Yeah, very helpful. Okay, so Tim, do you want to go?
Thanks. Yeah, broadly, I think it's a really good piece of work. So thank you for that. I think the alignment to the committees is pretty much where I'd have got them. I don't disagree with Connor's view on those, but I haven't got any significant one that I move around. I'd love to think that we were giving grants to any of these bodies and that we're agreed through committees, but not without a budget, we ain't. So it's that I don't think is yet a conversation to have. We're also going to need a mechanism to add and subtract things in running. This is good to have a strategic review at one point, but things that bodies will dissolve and create as life goes on, and there will need to be a mechanism which is a feedback mechanism, probably through the chief exec or the leader, which then takes it to an appropriate committee, etc. in future. So how one this isn't a one and dead change. This is going to be a little bit fluid. I just think in terms of the points that we're going to come, some of the questions that we're going to come to in a bit, I think I'd make the case that the appointments to the representatives of these committees are made by the committee to which they report, as opposed to making council ones. So that gives them the role of who's going to go to them and do the reporting. I think the frequency of reporting will kind of depend on the body. I think for many of them, annual will be perfectly enough. But there will be some whereby there are questions which are being brought back, or bits of business. I could offer Bosco as one, for instance, is that an annual reporting of that is more than likely to be enough until they turn around, until our partners turn around and ask us whether we're going to participate in £50,000 worth of tall ship project, which then needs to be discussed through. Actually, will then need a discussion, so that's going to generate its own piece of work at that stage. But broadly, I think the shape is pretty good. And the reporting lines, I think, make sense. And that's how just making the pitch for committees to do those appointments rather than not. And in almost all cases, there are very few cases whereby we're paying people to be on those. I think that we should, on those bodies, although Opportunitas and Otterpool Park are broadly the exceptions there, and are dealt with more under shareholding and directors rather than representative. So we just need to work out how that works, because they're not actually we've appointed them as a shareholder as opposed to or a director rather than being an appointee to the body, and we're just going to need to work out quite how that interfaces and what payments and things. But otherwise, all good.
Thank you, Tim. I'll come back because I want to ask one or two further questions about those. But Paul, do you want to add to the list that I can go back to?
Thank you. When you look at it, we're only removing 3 out of 31, which doesn't seem, a huge number. And the ones that have been recommended seem to be great. I was going to ask a few things which Tim's already covered, actually, but I think when it comes to training and appointments, is the formalising of that seems to be what is being suggested now. In other words, it isn't as it is currently. Yeah, you're nominated and off you go. So I just wonder whether we wanted to build into our arrangements an opportunity for people to put a, like a pen picture together, why we believe we're the right person for the job, which isn't what happens currently. So again, I know that's a little bit more transactional, but I just wonder, how we manage that within the committee system, and would that then influence who sits on what committee, which I think is what we're, which is where we seem to be heading at the moment with this. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I can come back then, if I start with the last one, Paul, can you give us I mean, I think if we can take that away as a team and just think about that, selection process per se, as you say, a pitch, who's the most appropriate and how we work that through. When you look at the range of outside bodies, you've got some lovingly called big beasts in there, like Optimal Park and Opportunitas, and then you've got right through the whole spectrum. And it is, as you say, that it's really only those two where we have a payment on those. And I do wonder, actually, for the purposes of this exercise, as you say, Tim, whether we sort of take them out of the outside bodies scope, because quite rightly, I'm hoping members will agree that they should sit under the shareholders committee. So I think probably they're a bit of an anomaly in terms of the scale and the size. So unless outside of this meeting, the home team sort of reflects and say, well, there's for some reason we can't, that would be my sort of proposal, really, because then we capture that as all part of that bit of work. I was also on that similar vein, actually. One of my questions to you all is, we have lovingly been called, referring to the shareholders committee. And of course, there are 4 organisations or 4 bodies, 4 things that we have a formal shareholding in. Optimal Park, Opportunitas, EKSDC at 16%, and Bosco at 50%. So one of my questions was actually, are all 4 of those more appropriately feeding into the shareholders committee? The only one I would probably argue might not is Bosco, because it generally has focused on community outcomes and activity. But I did think it might be helpful for us at least to have flushed that out or had that conversation here. So I'm generally getting nods about, let's take out the 2 big beasts into the shareholders committee. We've clearly got the 16% ownership in EKSDC, which again, my recommendation would be to have that as a third. Have I got a feel about Bosco from you? I'm very happy to let you mull it over till the next meeting if you want to mull it over, because it will just be a lift and shift. But Connor.
I agree with what you say, in terms, the projects are largely community based, but then, obviously it relies on us as a council putting funding in to make those projects happen. So then that's strategy and resources. I guess I'd need a bit more understanding about, how we're sort of, we're on that sort of, board. You said, we said we're 50%, part of it. So I guess I need to sort of have a better understanding of what that means in terms of, that relationship, and, us being shareholders on a board of a company the council owns. That's very straightforward. I can understand that. But yeah, I guess just trying to get more of an understanding of that relationship, that Bosco relationship, to have a better understanding of where it might sit.
Okay, that's really helpful, Connor. I think we probably will have to take that away and just reflect. But if we want to come back with a bit more detail on that to the next meeting, we certainly can do. I need to probably apply my brain a bit more purposefully to it. Okay. All right. So what I'm hearing is then we come back on that one, particularly Michelle. We take the other 3 out. Can I just then check about members' views about the appointments being made by committee as opposed to council? Was there any strongly held view? I know Tim's proposed that. Big thumbs up from Tim, but is there any other alternative view that anyone wants to suggest?
No, they all agree with me. Move on.
Oh, well, not so quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Well, don't have a problem agreeing. I just maybe David could help clarify. I mean, would full council have to sort of agree to delegate that to committees? I mean, or could we just write it into the constitution as is? But again, then the constitution could be changed by full council to change it back. So I think it's something that would need a wider input of councillors and a bit of legal assistance, perhaps.
David, do you want to respond to that before I bring another
Yeah,
councillor in?
of course, yeah. So yeah, it would be a delegation from full council because all power flows through the full council and has to be delegated down. So if full council were to determine that it was for X committee to appoint, then that would be how it would, that committee would then have that delegated authority to do it. Alternatively, the other option is that full council makes all of the appointments, perhaps, for example, at the annual meeting, along with the other appointments to committees, just so it's all wrapped up in that way, but based upon, so you could have, for example, something that might ordinarily align with a particular committee because of the nature of what the appointment is, but that committee can put a recommendation in, if you like, as part of what goes to full council for them to approve it on block. So it could be both. It could be either full council or the committee. But just to come back on something else, Susan, while I remember, I've been trying to remember where Ray's hand is, but I can't seem to find it for whatever reason. Anyway, so apologies. I'll keep trying and looking. But yeah, just in terms of reporting back, so outside bodies. So yes, of course, outside bodies, the companies in which you have interests and the limited liability partnership in which you have an interest are, of course, outside bodies. They're separate entities, but there needs to be a clear distinction between the council's role as a shareholder, which would be the shareholder subcommittee. So, for example, making decisions. So often you'll have reserve matters reserved for shareholders to determine, and that would be one of the roles of the shareholder committee. Whereas if you've appointed somebody to the board as a director, that's a different thing. They're separate in that entity. So that it might be that you have a reporting back, if that's what you wish to do, from the member who's appointed to be a director, but not into the shareholder subcommittee. I don't know if Kirsty's got any comments on either of those things.
No, and if I don't know where the raised hand is either, right? Because I'm used to Teams. I apologise, which is where it's quite straightforward. So all I'd say on the whether the committees make the appointment or council is that if you delegate to committee, you'll have to be definitive on the lists, and if that for any reason changes, it's got to go back to council to redelegate. So I think I'm with David's view that committees recommend, but council actually makes the appointment, and then you do it all in one go at the annual council meeting. But it is a matter for you. And on the second point, David, yes, I concur absolutely with him that your role in the shareholder committee is effectively as the owner of the company, and the relationship between you as the shareholder and the company, and being appointed as a director is a separate thing.
Okay, so I think so are you suggesting that having the matters considered, the appointments considered by council as part of the AGM, when of course we have that item which is these are the roles that people take, is that what you're suggesting, Kirsty, David? I know that's not what Tim's suggesting. The suggesting is that it's delegated from council to. I just want to check I've understood.
I think it's entirely a matter for you, what works best for you. There isn't any hard and fast rule.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that council will have to delegate a definitive list. So if for any reason that list changes, they're going to have to do it again, or add or take away. But that's not a big deal, really, is it?
No. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful in terms of that exchange with Connor. Just on that, is there a strong view either way from members? I know Tim's still proposing it. Are the members, have you got a strongly held view? Nope.
Well, I've got my hand up.
Go on.
Yes, same here.
So's Paul. So are they on separate issues, or are they on this issue?
I don't know what Paul's issue is.
Sorry, well, let me ask you then, Jim, talking. Is it on this issue about whether they are decided at the AGM, or is it a matter that's delegated to for a decision at the committee?
Yes. So having done this, there is a lot of begging that goes on. You know, members aren't falling over themselves to take on these extra roles. So, you know, there are some roles that, you know, particular members feel they have a very strong interest in, very strong, you know, value to add, and then they will ask if they can be appointed to that body. But in reality, the majority of them are, you know, I was begging people to take up the role. So, you know, there's a lot of work in this in terms of, you know, human interaction, as it were. There are some very, very kind of flattering, unattractive roles here. There are, you know, 2 or 3 sort of starring roles, and it's so it just seems to me that we have to consider the difficulty of you know, getting this list together completely. I don't think it really matters. Someone's going to have to put this list together for the committee to approve or full council to approve. But it's the work that goes on under that I think is the challenge. Getting people to actually say they'll do it, and getting the right people in the right jobs. You know. There is a surprising amount of work in it. That's why I'm really keen on reducing the number, because that will reduce the overall work of getting. I remember having to say to people, you know, please do this. They never meet. You know, you won't have to do anything. Just please say that you'll do it. So.
So we'd like us to have a look again whether there's more that we can rationalise rather than 3 already. Do you want us to have another look at that?
I think if we can all reflect on it, I'm not suggesting that. I will go with the flow, and I'm just, you know, giving my experience of trying to appoint members to these roles. With some roles, there's a queue of people jostling for those roles. The majority of them, they're not.
Okay. Great, thank you, Jim. Paul,
Okay.
is it on this issue, or are we going to move on to another issue?
No, it was on this issue actually. I just support what Jim's saying really about the transactional aspect of this, really, in terms of what you have to do in advance of being able to decide, you know, is it something that we do all in one big hit, which is great. And there's nothing to stop us from actually preparing to do that a little way before the AGM, is there? You know, so, you know, we're going with this system. Once we've made the decision as to whether it's council or committee, and whether that becomes a delegated thing to the committee, that's the key decision. But irrespective of which way it goes, we'll still have to collect almost like a pen picture of each of the individual councillors, so that when you do make the decision about where to allocate the resources, you make sure that the things which are specific to a particular role on an outside body, you know, that can't be met. And we're not selling the outside body short then, or even putting people in a position where they might feel uncomfortable undertaking that role, Susan. So that's the only thing that I was going to mention on that whole.
Okay.
Oh, getting the right people in the right place at the right time.
That's helpful. We'll reflect further on that before we come back again. Tim, and then Connor.
Yeah, I promise I'll be brief. Again, in terms of delegation to committees, as far as I can see at this stage, this is relatively simply, we create an appendix, which is the delegation of appointment to those outside bodies, and literally it's an appendix. You just list that this committee will lose that, this committee will do those, this committee will appoint those, and that's a single delegation. If you have it that it's recommended by committees and then agreed by council, you're not doing it at the AGM, because you're going to agree the committees at the AGM. The committees have then got to meet, put together their recommendation and take it back to council in order to make the actual appointments, and life has just got longer than it needs to be. Whereas if we just delegate it to this, we just say the committees appoint to these bodies, which the council can then move around, you make the life shorter. And I'm in favour of making my life shorter.
Heard and understood, Connor?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, one of the benefits of having the decisions made within committee is, you know, the people within that committee, if they're going on to bodies that report back to that committee, then obviously, you know, there's a clearer line of reporting, perhaps, rather than, you know, if someone was on an outside body that was sitting on another committee or not sat on, you know, the relevant committee, then, you know, then that's perhaps more additional time if they were to attend another meeting to report back, you know. So I'm just thinking along, you know, that sort of continuity and you know, making sure things sort of align themselves.
All right, thank you, Connor. Michelle, did you put a sort of an actual hand up?
I did, because I can't find the hand one either, so I thought I'll just try that one, see if you notice.
Oh, right, it is just on that, so everyone's clear. If you go into the reactions, it's if you click on your reaction on the ticker tape at the bottom, you should have all sorts of things: a heart, a thumbs up, a clapping, lots of different emojis.
Thank you. I saw that and I thought I was just going to send a heart to everyone, so I thought I don't want to press it and just completely derail everyone. Thank you, though. I was just going to say that when you are considering the proposals that I've made, I have proposed that 7 are removed from the outside bodies, that 4 are retained on the partnership list and 3 are removed. So it does actually reduce the number by 7, just when you're having your considerations. Thanks, Susan.
Great, lovely. And I think going back onto my list, and I think I've covered issues that Tim has raised, and I think it's very sensible about the annual reporting unless there's something more exceptional. So we will return, unless there's anything else that members want to raise, we will return with the next instalment. Is that right, Michelle? Is there anything else, Michelle, that you need from members to help you progress the work?
No, I don't think so. I was just looking back through what we would ask everyone to consider. Duration of appointments, but I think again that might come back to how you decide whether it's appointed by council or delegated, because that might make that system a little bit tricky if we decided to change duration. But I think that was it. For me, that was a really useful conversation and really good input, so thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, my own personal view, I think, is that, you know, there are some committees where some outside bodies that, you know, you need longer than a year because of the relationships in the work programme and the frequency of some of those meetings. Otherwise we get chopping and changing. But we will give some more thought and come back. Right. Okay, I've lost track of the agenda now. Gemma, come to my rescue. Where are we going now?
Yep. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is public participation. This came about following the question and answers that were recently circulated. There was a debate at this working group several months ago about 2 matters. The first one was following, at the moment, for the overview and scrutiny work programme, we go out and invite suggestions from members of the public and parish councils for them to be able to put work on our scrutiny work programme. And I thought it would be a good idea to have a discussion about whether we wanted to introduce something similar for the work programmes for the new service committees. And then the second point to discuss is about whether we want to have public questions at committees and subcommittees.
Okay, all right. So my sense is, if I take them one by one, sorry, just in looking back at my notes, that's really helpful, Gemma, about public questions at committee. I think I've heard you mention before that you would like to offer a facility for that. I have spoken to places elsewhere that run that system just to see how, you know, how they operationalize that. And they have it very much aligned with the rhythm that we have at council anyway, where they are allowed to ask one question and then a related supplementary, but it has to be on the business of the committee at that meeting. So it's related to the papers of the committee, because otherwise we'd have like mini councils and I'd have to have all my sort of staff there and everything, and I just couldn't see how I could operationalise it. So that would be, I suppose, my sort of starting suggestion, having listened to you about what you would like to try and weave in, assuming that our legal friends will tell us it's permissible. So that is public questions are permissible at the committees, the 2 main committees, one and then a supplementary related, in person, and that there are certain rules and timelines to be used about the submissions. So clearly it does concertina the timeline a bit, members, because the questions couldn't come in until we've published the pack, because that's the business of the committee. So Gemma, I've asked to think through about how can we make that work in terms of a question coming in, officers being able to pull the information together in order for that to be presented at the time of that agenda item at that committee. So does that, Jim, you've got your hand up, but does that feel about right? But Jim.
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, if you hadn't said it, I would have suggested it, Susan. You know, we have to get the public involved, and you know, we have to go through the rigor of public questioning, public examination. So yeah, and how we make it work, I'm sure you'll make it work for us. The other thing that I just want to stress, and I don't have any answers, but I'm delighted that Gemma has got this in the forefront of her mind, is all the way through all of these meetings, I think, you know, all of us are concerned about losing the overview and scrutiny formal process. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, David has often told us that, you know, this is something we have to do within the committees. We all agree, we're all, you know, we get that. But what we lack is something that we can point at and say, we've been through overview and scrutiny. You know, there is an overview and scrutiny process within this process, and we've pursued it or we've implemented it, etc. Whenever we will be, you know, called into question as about how we've arrived at some decision or how we've done something or other, that will be, you know, how have you reviewed this? Has this been properly scrutinised? And it won't be any good for us to say, oh well, we had a jolly good chat about it during the committee. You know, do you know what I mean? We at the moment we've got a very, very defined process within that committee which we can point at and say it went to overview and scrutiny, but we lose that. I understand that we're going to have to do our own scrutiny. You know, I understand but we're lacking something that we can point at.
Good, thanks, Jim. And that was the second of the issues, I think, Gemma, on your list. I was going to ask Kirsty and David for their views on that, because I'm aware elsewhere where they will say, well, as the work plan for the committee is considered for the year with the chairman, there is opportunity to take, for example, a maximum of, say, 2 additional either investigations or issues to explore in addition. The reason I'm keen to sort of limit how many we do, because just officer time and resources, but appointing, and we'll all recognise this, won't we? We had a really, really good scrutiny session on the entry-exit system, where we had multiple partners that came in. We're planning another one for you all in September with a whole host of partners about, and the IDB, about drainage and the marsh and various other things. So, you know, I totally understand, Jim, what you're after. I'm just not sure within the legal framework how best we do it. So I'm probably going to put colleagues on the spot here about, you know, are those sort of things best treated as separate investigations under the Constitution, or are they best woven into the work plans of the relevant committee with a maximum of X over the year? So I know Connor wants to come in, but shall I just, David, do you want to just give me a view and then we can perhaps pick up?
Yeah,
what it means?
Yeah, happy to do so. Yeah, I mean, obviously we all know that there isn't an overview and scrutiny committee, and it's certainly not a requirement at all of the committee system for the reasons that we've rehearsed a number of times. I think I think it's probably worthwhile thinking about it in terms of having them under the umbrella of each relevant committee, and certainly having, as Susan suggested, a limit, but so setting up maybe a task group, but identifying those issues with the chair when looking at the work plan at the outset to say, well, this is something that we want to look at and want to feed into our policy development and decisions. It's relevant to X, Y, and Z. And so therefore we want to set up this task group or a working group to go and have a look at this and to report back into the committee. But I think it's really important that it's done that way because then it's in a managed way through the chair as part of the work plan. And also, so I do think it's very sensible to have limits on these things. I'm not suggesting that members are going to want to, there's going to be a significant proliferation in these working groups, but I do think, there are limited resources and it will require officer support. So and it also helps focus the mind in terms of saying, well, these are the most important issues to us and to our residents, and they're the ones we're going to look at. So personally, I think that's a sensible way of doing it, but I will defer to Kirsty if Kirsty has anything to add.
No, agree entirely. I think if you had your traditional overview and scrutiny, again, you'd be thinking about, you couldn't look at everything, even in cabinet overview and scrutiny system. So you've got to look at what pre-decisions are really important to us, what areas do we really need to look at because they're important for our priorities and objectives, and you're doing exactly the same but within the committee system. I think the thing I agree entirely with David that if you're looking at an in-depth service review, probably the best way to do that is through a task and finish group, because a committee structure, just as an overview and scrutiny committee structure, isn't the ideal way to tackle those sort of issues. But what you can do in the committee is really focus on performance management. And what we started to develop was providing information to the members on the intranet about key performance indicators, but then taking to committee those. We had a traffic light system. You've probably got something similar where you've got your red, amber, green, and then you took things back to members where they were red or where they were amber, and looked at the reasons why and how they might be mitigated and addressed. So that's something you can do actually within the committee.
Okay.
Both within the committee and outside of the committee through the intranet, and a facility for members, if they've got any questions or concerns about performance, to go to officers and ask questions.
Okay, thank you for that, both of you. Connor, do you want to come in?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, very, very much in favour of keeping, some sort of work programme, that allows members of the public to feed in, and general councillors. I think most of the things that would come on the work programme would fit into, the either of the two committees. I think if there was something a little bit more, out there, similar to like the water stuff that we've done through OSC, the border things that we've done, that one of the two committees that thought it was the most relevant to, as was just mentioned, could create a task and finish group, just to look at, that single issue, that should be, that's very common in councils and committee councils, and that should definitely be something that's referenced to in the constitution. The committees do have the ability to create, a single issue, a group, a task group to to investigate or to provide answers. I mean, there's lots of things going on right now in the community that residents quite rightly would probably want some answers to, that might warrant such a investigation, in the near future. So I think that should definitely be permissible and allowed.
Okay, thank you, Connor. Tim?
Yeah, agreeing with Connor, and also and very much agreeing that there should be the annual call for items, so that we've got the opportunity to feed them into as effectively as scrutiny items into one of those two committees. To deal with Jim's point at that stage, we still have scrutiny. You can still have a paper, or you can still have a discussion paper, a scrutiny paper around a subject, even where the council doesn't have necessarily deep control of that. But it is a scrutiny paper which is heard by the Strategy and Resources Committee, or it's a scrutiny paper which is heard by the Communities and Environment Committee, or indeed a scrutiny paper which is heard by the Housing Committee, if that's appropriate. So you would do the scrutiny in those places. I don't think anybody has ever looked at. Scrutiny paper has gone to overview and scrutiny, and therefore that's the optimal place for it. They want to know that the discussion, that there was a discussion was had, that there was the subject was looked at by councillors appropriately, and that then the decisions were taken based on that, and that can absolutely definitely happen. We are not getting rid of scrutiny. We are doing scrutiny into the two committees, where your recommendations at the end of that can actually include doing stuff, whereas they currently can't really for the scrutiny committee. The scrutiny committees say, okay, we've looked at this, we've got some ideas, and maybe the cabinet would like to look at those ideas. Whereas actually a committee can look at those things and say, okay, we've had a look at these things, and these are the things we want to happen. So the recommendations are more depending on the level, whether they fit within the delegation or not. And I'm sure the students will tell me that you can only agree to do the things that you can agree to do. But nonetheless, it gives that possibility. So, so yes, very much want the ability to retain the ability for people to feed ideas into that programme. And I accept that you can't have three of those a meeting, because it will drive you mad and drive the meetings really long. But it should be retained. I do wonder if there's a question of whether our petition scheme currently, at the moment, you could call a petition could call something effectively to be discussed at a meeting. There might be a way of, it might be worth just having a look at how the petition scheme feeds into that, because effectively if 1,000 people sign a petition at the moment, then I believe that can call it to a debate. Well, that's effectively calling for a paper to go to one of the committees for a discussion. Well, let's think about how that interfaces and does that, so that we've got that mechanism. It might be that what's there at the moment is exactly right, but on the other hand, I guess it isn't, because it wasn't designed for that purpose.
All right, that's really helpful, Tim. If we can take that petition bit away and have a think, bring that back to the next meeting, if that's all right. If members agree. Paul, do you want to? The reason why I've just seen the time, and I would no one want to have enough time for the next item. So, Paul.
It just very quickly, I support what Tim is saying with regard to the mechanism, but again, I think if people do put suggestions forward, it's not to say we have to take everything in year one, and we can show how we're likely to be able to take that over an extended period of time. So again, it's just helping the committees and the officers to manage their workload. We just need to make that clear in terms of the feedback that we give people who ask us to look at a particular piece of work or a particular issue.
Okay, great. Thank you, Paul. And we'll think about the process around all of that.
Sorry, Susan. And just one more quick thing, just to allay Jim's fears again. Things that things could happen moving forward. Obviously, things that currently go to cabinet are going to cabinet for decision. But overview and scrutiny looks at sort of the evolution of a decision. So things come to overview and scrutiny in much earlier sort of infant stages. So I'm sure that sort of work program, things like Folker and those sorts of big projects, they could feed through the committees, not really needing much decision, but just having a discussion, just having a debate, moving that direction forward. So something that I think there's definitely scope for that role that overview and scrutiny does to happen within the existing committees.
I just wanted to point out that the fact that you've retained your key decision definition and your forward plan requirement, even though you didn't have to, I think will be very helpful in informing that work. Because again, taking it from my own experience, we thought, oh, we don't have to do a forward plan anymore, let's not bother. And we actually reinstated it to help shape the kind of pre-decision work of committees.
That's really helpful, Kirsty. Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, I don't want to curtail the discussion, but I think, Gemma, we've covered the 2 bullet points on your on the agenda. Yeah, you're happy with that? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and there's some things for us to come back to, Gemma, next time, which we can discuss inside of this. So I found my agenda now. So the next item 6 is a discussion. Am I right, Gemma? Yeah, the general discussion about any other issues that members have raised, and I'm also conscious that we've got a further item on the Constitution First Draft. So in the half an hour, 29 minutes we've got left, members, are there any other issues that you want to flag at this stage for us to explore further and come back to? Any other concerns? Jim?
Yeah, thanks very much, Susan. It's really just returning to my discussion about individual members of the committee and their roles. Now, obviously, we've been discussing about individual committee members taking roles on outside bodies and liaising and connecting with those bodies and then reporting back to committees. All very good. And you know, you'll recall that I've been sort of banging the drum about individual committee members being assigned parts of the council's functions. So waste collection, for example, housing, for example, you know, the list goes on, where individual committee members would act on behalf of the committee, would act as the primary liaison with the responsible officer and could report back to the committee with regard to any particular issues, etc., etc. But more importantly, I think that committee member could convey the support, the sort of, you know, kind of touchstone, the liaison, the with the principal officer, just to demonstrate that we all work as a team, rather than kind of officer member segregation, shall we say.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I know you've raised it before. I've got some anxieties about that, because all committee members are, as I understand it, equal. The chair clearly is there to manage the decision making and the business of the activity of the committee, and to make sure that we get through the work programme, etc., etc. David Kirsty, is there any a further advice that you can give? I mean, obviously you've heard the desire, but I'm not sure how we would operationalise that within a committee legal structure of decision making.
Okay, well, the only thing I can offer is that you need to design your committee system so that it isn't over bureaucratic and you can make decisions quickly where you need to. And that is a distinction between the cabinet system, where an individual portfolio holder can make a decision.
Yeah, Kirsty, can I just hold you there? I'm not talking about decisions.
Oh, right. Well, I was just going to suggest.
I'm not talking about decisions,
no,
right? So let's leave. So no decisions in the sentences. This is all about support and help and liaison and connecting. It's not about decisions. The decisions are made by the committee and or the officers. So I'm not talking about individual committee members making decisions. What I'm talking about is individual committee members acting in a similar way to the way we want them to act on outside bodies, to liaise, to support and to report back. No decision making.
No, I think that's more difficult, and I'll bring David in a minute. The reason I mentioned decision making is where officers make decisions, there may be circumstances where, for example, you might consult with the chair, the vice chair, or even the opposition spokesman, whatever works within your. I mean, I've just come new to this, so I don't know what your culture and your political. Don't fully understand the political complexion, so. You know, sometimes you might involve an opposition spokesperson, sometimes you might not. But I think you can look at what can the chair do, and maybe what can the vice chair, what can opposition spokesman, but all members. I think it's difficult because they can't individually speak on behalf of the committee. So that's your conundrum, really. So yeah. I'll throw that over to.
I'm not asking them to be spokespersons. In fact, we've decided, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that we're not having spokespersons. We're not having champions. All we've got is a chair and a vice chair. And it strikes me that the rest of the committee doesn't really have a great deal to do except to go and serve on outside bodies. So I'm just very, very keen that the officers get the support and have the liaison that you know, at the moment they have, and I think that is how we work together rather than working in two separate silos.
Well, they still have the role they always had as community advocates and bringing
Yeah,
back the views of
casework,
the
absolutely
constituents back.
no problem on the casework at all. I'm
They
talking
still have
about
that.
I'm talking
And-
about the administration. I'm not talking about their casework as ward councillors.
Well, I'm going to throw that one over today because I think that's a conundrum. The only other kind of role I can see is the local member role, you know, and being consulted on local issues and feeding back on local issues and on consultation and so on. But I think within a committee system, and indeed as a non-executive member in a cabinet system, the primary role is to represent your constituents and to be the advocate of your community, but then it's the committee collectively that discusses, debates and decides the way forward. But that is so as well in a cabinet system. David, I don't know if you can add anything.
Yeah, I mean, we do have in terms of the chairs and the vice chairs, they are obviously not spokespersons, but they take a lead in specified areas to help manage the business, etc. It's not the same as being a portfolio holder. It can't be, we all know that. But they have, and the number of those is very similar to the number of portfolio holders that you presently have at the council. But I think it is going to be difficult if you start saying, well, actually, we're going to have X number of individuals on this committee, each having this specific area to look at and report back on. It's going to cause, it will slow things down, and it also dilutes things. I think it's really important. And as we've said, you know, as individual members of the committee, they have no platform beyond any other member of the committee, whereas the chair and the vice chair do have sort of more of a leading role, and they manage the business that's coming through and what's coming out as well. So I think we do have these lead members. They have topics. So, for example, it's not, you know, so we've got the strategy and resources. The chair's the lead on strategy, the vice chair lead on resources. I appreciate they're quite wide areas, but nonetheless, I think it's important that it's focused through them. And they will be a conduit. They will be a contact point for officers. It will give officers political cover, because that's really important. Of course it is. But it's just a very different model, and it's all about the committee generally, rather than, you know, powers being focused in individuals. And I know you understand that, Jim, absolutely. But yeah, it's not that we're saying, oh no, you wouldn't have a member who's sort of taking a lead on a certain area. As we've said, that's worked into the principles that have been agreed and discussed. It's just, I think, if you start to sort of dilute that down, it starts to become potentially unmanageable and complicated, and it will slow things down. And that's one of the, I'll say, problems of a committee system, is that it's the decision making, the speed of decision making can be a lot slower than an executive system, which is another reason why there tends to be more delegation to officers as well. So it's not that, as I say, I just think what we've, you know, because we've discussed this at length, haven't we, in previous group meetings, about what it's important for you because you want lead members, and we've worked that in. But I think it's been, what we've worked in is going to be manageable and sensible. And I think changing that now and looking at, as I say, splitting that out even more is just going to be potentially problematic. But the other thing as well, I would say, is, look, you know, a lot of this is about, oh, it's the unknown, because you're moving to a system that you haven't experienced before. And so there will be things once you're up and running that you think, actually, this isn't working so well, we can change this. And you can always look to change these things. So if further down the line you think, well, actually, our lead roles, how it's set up at the moment, doesn't quite work. I'm not suggesting that we will be in that position. I'm hoping that you'll be in a position where you say, oh, it's working really well. But if you do get to that position, you can then say, well, let's have a look at that again and see if we can change it. And now we've also got the better understanding, a practical understanding of how this committee system is operating as well. So I hope that helps.
Well, it doesn't really, David, because we've spent a lot of time earlier in the meeting discussing how we appoint members to go and represent us on outside bodies, to listen, liaise, coordinate with them, to come back and report. But we can't do that with our own departments. You know, if we trust individual committee members, don't call them spokespersons, lead members, no titles at all. A committee member that we send off to go and talk to the internal drainage board or something, come back and report to us. We trust them to do that, but we won't trust them to liaise with our own waste department. It seems to me that we're absolutely wasting a huge resource that we have in terms of members who want to be involved in the day-to-day business of our own business, let alone anybody else's business.
But it's not the role of a member to be involved in the day-to-day business, the operational side of things.
No, I get that, and that's what you keep telling me.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that's wrong. They should be, because that's you know, if you want, you could evolve that out of your ward councillor role, or you know, if you've got a particular, you know, if say for example you're the ward member that has Dungeness Power Station in their ward, well then are you suddenly responsible for all things nuclear? Do you know what I mean? It seems to me to be ridiculous that that the committee members are unable to take a special interest in special areas of the district's operations.
Well, I mean, in terms of getting involved in the sort of the day-to-day operational business, it's no different in the committee system necessarily than it is in an executive system, because even though the executive members will have individual powers, their decisions will be above certain thresholds, and it will be about policy and strategy as well. But it's the officers who
see, David, you're back on decision making.
No,
I'm not talking about decision making. What I'm talking about is liaising, supporting, helping, etc. I'm not talking about decision making. So there is no threshold. You know,
no, I agree. I'm not saying that. I appreciate it might sound like I am. I'm just trying to, you know, make the distinction, but also just saying, look, we have worked in. And it's important. I know it's important to you, Councillor Martin, and the other councillors, that there is that link between members and officers. But we've worked that in with the lead members in a way that they will provide that support and liaison and feedback, and you know, planning and looking at the policy direction and the strategy side of things. But I understand, you know, what you're saying, but the practicalities of what we've got and what we're moving towards, there has to be a limit around certain things, and it is the remit of the committee system is collective decision making. And I'm not saying I'm not going back into decision making. I know I just mentioned decision making, but I'm not making the distinction because of decision making, but it's about being a collective. And I think, I don't know, Kirsty, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, the only thing I can think that perhaps meets you halfway is looking at that role of local members and saying that where we're making a significant decision that impacts on a particular ward, we will always consult and engage with the local members. So that delivers your, you know, if Dungeness Power Station is in your ward, you will know the officers will come to you and say, what do you think about this? What do you, from hearing feedback from constituents, think about this? And this will be fed into the process. But beyond that, I have to entirely agree with David that whether it be a cabinet or a committee system, and if you look at LGA guidance on this, members focus on strategy, officers are responsible for day-to-day management, and you're treading a very dangerous line if you deviate from that, and you start to get into a position where members are directing more junior officers, get into a whole can of worms there.
I think that's a helpful exchange. I'm not sure actually, Jim, whether that really satisfies you fully, but I do understand the issue. I would just say that, you know, we have woven into the chair and vice chairs and the structure about a lead on strategy, a lead on finance, a lead on community, a lead on environment, a lead on housing, a lead on shareholders' bodies, a lead on planning, a lead on audit and governance, and a lead on personnel. So those are the sort of top of my head without looking back at my notes. So I've got about 9 leads that are expressed in the chair role or the vice chairs of the structure that you've agreed. So that feels to me, you know, like 9 people that are we working with. We're looking at the work plan. We're doing a forward look. Beyond, as you've said, Kirsty, the sort of local member sort of touch base with a particular issue theme. It does feel as I've got nine people in those chair or vice chairs roles that we are there to, as you say, help support liaise. So whether it's just a sort of shift from the executive to those 9, as I've described, which you've broadly agreed as a group, whether it's just a language issue or not, I don't know. I'm not sure we're going to resolve it today. I know Paul wants to come in. I don't know if Tim had a hand up down, and there is another item, and we've got sort of 13 minutes. So I really don't want to curtail it. I know we can come back again next time. But Paul, is it on this item or is it another issue?
Oh, yeah, it's very much on this item. So again, in the draft constitution that we've been given, as you quite rightly say, 11.3.1 tells us very much what the alignment is between chair, vice chair, and being the lead role, and there are 10 of them identified in there. I think what we've been kicking around for the last couple of minutes is actually what's in 11.3.2 and 11.3.3. 11.3.2 talks about general responsibilities, but it is actually quite prescriptive, actually, and it says that the chair and the vice chair will be the lead on outside bodies. So I just wonder, just reflecting on what Jim is alluding to as well, is whether we might need to have a little look at the wording in there. But 11.3.3 is absolutely crystal clear. They have no decision-making capability whatsoever in terms of that role. So we really do lay on the line in terms of what we say within our constitution. We just need to understand how does that work. Which I think is Jim's point. How do we get the best use out of the people, and how do we get the best use out of the committees? So I think spending a bit more time on 11.3.2 and understanding that a little bit more, and then I think we'll be able to answer some of the queries that Jim's gotten, and get away from what I think is a bit of a conflict area at the moment, or that's the way it seems anyway. But I think it's only about just establishing a little bit more understanding in that area, and it's all doable because lots of other people are doing it, aren't they? And they seem to make it work quite adequately. So 11.3.2, maybe we just need to focus a meeting entirely on that, because it's absolutely fundamental to how the constitution is going to work in the future. That's all from me. Thank you.
It's a very practical suggestion, Paul. I will look back at 11.3.2 and 11.3.3, and we will make sure we have enough time on the next agenda to have to make sure we thoroughly address that. But Tim, did you up or down? Are we moved on? We've moved on. Okay. Are there any other issues arising? I will just say I have had some exchange, and I know Councillor Prater went to scrutiny to give an update about casework, about being addressed to named officers for issues. So I think that there's an operational way I can make that work for you all, which I think is quite efficient. The question about if there are any emergency or time sensitive issues, they know they can come direct to me as your chief always. So I don't think that there's anything outstanding in terms of casework handling, but again, please shout if you see otherwise. Okay, I think on that basis, if there's no other outstanding issues, we can go on to the final item, which is, I think, David, I'm over to you for the circulated document. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Well, first of all, members, I apologise for not having those drafts with you sooner. Hopefully you can see there's quite a lot of work gone into those parts that have come out for you to note what's going on. There are, of course, going to be other parts of the Constitution, and we're working on those, but I didn't feel they were in a stage where it was useful to send them on, but they'll be following shortly. But what I should make clear is this is very much a first draft. It's there as a, well, not necessarily a straw man. Hopefully it incorporates the key sort of principles that we've been discussing, etc. And there will be tweaks that are required, and there will be things that are changed. But our job is to talk to you, for you to say to us, look, this is what we want to see in terms of the overall direction, the strategies, and everything else. And then we go away and do the fine details, and put it together as a document. So the one thing I will say is, presently your constitution has quite a lot of parts to it, and what I've put forward is the suggestions you'll see in that part 1, where it gives you a brief overview of what each part covers. I've kind of consolidated things where things fit together in my mind in a more sort of logical way. So for example, grouping together all of the procedure rules and that sort of thing. The other thing I'll say is, Kirsty's already picked a few things up in the first part 1 that will need to be changed. It's nothing major. One of the things was looking at those the policy framework and what's required to be dealt with as part of the policy framework by full council. The first one of those isn't relevant to you as a council. I put them all in, and then intended to take out, and I didn't take that one out. There were others that I did take out. So there are little things like that. So please, it is a first draft. Be kind, hopefully. So yeah, Kirsty's, as I say, reviewing and working on that with me. I apologise you won't have had opportunity to have really sort of read it through in detail. But as I say, there will be other parts coming as well, and updated drafts of those parts that you have been sent to. Don't think there's anything else necessary that I suppose just your views generally in terms of, is this sort of does it look like what you were expecting? Is it what you would want to see, that sort of thing?
All right, thank you, David. So members, does this first pass? We're going to be coming back and backwards and forwards on this with you as we get do a bit more intensive work. Are there any initial observations? Thank you, Paul, for flagging the ones we need to focus on for next time. Absolutely. But if there are any others, Tim, I can see you put your hand up.
Please never apologise for giving me 2 hours to read a constitution. That's lovely. Had a great morning. There are a few things. I've made some amendments which I'll email across to you, where I think there are issues in terms of that. You've called us a borough a number of times. Yeah. We're not. You have a number of sections which refer to chairman, and 11.1 etc. refers to chair throughout. I'd prefer chair throughout, whereas 5 goes with chairman. So I've deleted about 18 men, which sounds like a way forward. There are I think the residents' input section there, we're going to have the question around the petition scheme and whether that can input into the work programme, and also it references public question time at council. I think that should also register council and committee would be relevant under that section. Neither the point, although I accept that there's going to be another section which deals with this in more detail. I think the rescission and referral items, rescission should be referred to, I think, under a function of council, and referrals should be referred to as a function of the committees. That they are something that they can do in order to bring those decisions in there. I accept that you would then have the detailed rules about both of those elsewhere, but you should refer to them, I think. Scrolling down my notes, it was quite a long document. But as I said, thank you for the time. There's one just question around the more significant question. So the deputy leader has now become the chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee, which was news to me. because it had previously been the vice chair of the Strategy and Resources Committee was going to be the deputy leader, and suddenly it became the chair of the Resources and Environment Committee, which was news. Now,
how do you feel about that, Tim? It's sorry, it's just a drafting error. I realise it's the chair and vice chair of the strategy that's the leader,
Okay.
deputy leader. So that's fine. I'll change that.
I actually didn't have a huge axe to grind either way. And if people had said, well, that is what has been agreed, then that wasn't. So yeah, 10.2.2 is therefore wrong, etc. at that stage. Also, 10.2.3, they're going to hold the post-election annual meeting. Leader and deputy leader are then in post, and that applies for 4 years, which is less usual under a committee system, whereby usually under a committee system that would be an annual election, I think, as opposed to a 4-yearly one. But that was news to me at that stage, and I didn't. So I wanted that flagged up because that's a question in terms of how one rolls through those. So yeah, they were a few starting points, but I'll send you across my detailed annotated notes later, which picks up some of those. But yeah, there were just a couple of structural things in there that I was curious on.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, the 4-year term. I suppose what I should have said when I introduced it as well is that I'm working on the premise that I'm going to try and use as much from your current constitution as I possibly can. Because there's going to be a big significant change in terms of the way you operate, and there's no point in me giving you a whole new document to get to grips with. So it's a case of amending and adopting those bits that can be adopted wholesale that work, whether it's under executive or committee, but then taking bits, and yes, there are going to be new parts in there, and there will be new parts. I mean, the articles have to be different because they wouldn't, the standard articles that you have now reflect an executive system, and that's not appropriate. So, there's lots of little tweaks going on, but it's not a case of me saying, right, I've got a blank page and I'm just going to write what I think is appropriate. I think it's important for you to have an element of continuity there, so there's some familiarity around what you have in place rather than having to get to grips with a whole new document. So it's a case of, so with the appointment of leader and deputy leader, yes, it probably is more common in a committee system for them to be appointed on an annual basis. I'm sure Kirsty can help with that one, but I just changed it to reflect what you currently have. So if that's not what you want, and I appreciate the position of leader, and you all appreciate the position of leader and deputy leader is different under a committee system, we can look at changing that as well.
I don't think there's any legislation that says it has to be annual, but equally they've now changed the provisions for cabinet systems, because that used to be 4-yearly, and then it was changed under the Localism Act and can now be yearly, but most councils have retained 4 years. So yes, I'm not aware of anything within a committee system that says it should be annual, but I think that is the norm, if you like.
Okay, there's plenty, obviously, to think through. All I would say, David, I take your sentiment about keeping with the familiarity where it's appropriate, but can I just stress where it's appropriate? I really don't want to create a camel that I'm trying to have wedged together 2 constitutions that just don't fit. So I think that's going to be a skill in the drafting, I guess, and the strategic oversight understanding from you and Kirsty. So, okay. Can we have?
It would also, if it reads annual at this stage, it also removes the first year problem that we otherwise have, which is that in May you have to do the election. We're going to have to do that, and it's not the post-election year, and therefore you're dealing with you're not acting within the constitution that you've just agreed, because it says post-election year, and yet it won't be. So actually, if you make it annual, then you just start your cycle in May without there being a need to put in except sometimes when we're going to do it, except the first time when we're going to do it now clause. So gets you off an appendix.
Okay, we clearly lots of things for us to think through, and bring back to you. Just conscious of time, I know a number of us have to go elsewhere. So any other burning issues for the team? Otherwise, Gemma, have I done the agenda now? I think we've got through it all, haven't we?
You have, there was only one more item on the agenda, I believe, which was date of next meeting, but I think we've got some actions to go away with, and perhaps it's better to get back in touch with members and get a date in the diary in due course.
Yeah, I'd certainly hope that that would be within early September if we can, Gemma, just to keep up the profile of all of this. But members can give us orders. To get the work done would be great. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands for any other urgent items. So can I just bring it to conclusion? Thank you all for your input. And when the weekend finally arrives, have a good one.
You too. All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.